Hello, I'm Max Hollein, the Marina Callan French Director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's my pleasure to extend a welcome to you, our virtual viewers, and to today's speakers for the Healing Arts New York panel. Today's virtual event marks the opening of Healing Arts New York. This is a citywide engagement with the role of the arts as a new frontier and partner in health, care, and well-being. I hope you will also join us on November 14 for the concluding symposium that will convene artists, healthcare workers, researchers, and policymakers to share ideas and best practice. Both of these events are co-hosted by the Met and the World Health Organization's Arts and Healing Program, and they are produced by CULTURUNNERS in partnership with the Creative Arts Therapies Consortium at NYU Steinhardt and the Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. For centuries, ideas about health were communicated through the visual arts. At the Met, we have many examples that range from Renaissance-era texts that feature medical illustrations to amulets and sculptural representations from the ancient world, whose proximity were believed to heal and benefit their communities. Today, we know that the connection between health and the arts and its importance goes far beyond the historical. A groundbreaking study issued by the World Health Organization in 2019 suggests that all forms of art, including the visual arts, dance, and the performing arts, promote good health and are valuable in supporting the treatment of non-communicable diseases and in the management of chronic conditions across one's lifespan. Clearly, arts and culture have an incredible power to foster community and solidarity, and to contribute to a greater sense of well-being and understanding for the individual. We certainly experienced this firsthand here at the Met when we released virtual talks, art-making demonstrations, and stories during the pandemic. So many viewers of these videos from all over the world reached out to tell us how valuable they were, how much these experiences with art-making and learning supported them, and helped them to feel more connected through a global crisis full of uncertainty. Today, we'll hear from researchers and practitioners working in the innovative area of arts and health and explore together how these two sectors can collaborate for greater alignment on practice and policy. We are honored to have with us today the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adenamon Ghebreyesus, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome and introduce him. Dr. Tedros is a globally recognized health scholar, advocate, and diplomat. He was elected as the WHO's Director General at the 70th World Health Assembly in May 2017, the first person from the WHO African region to assume the role. As Director General, Dr. Tedros initiated the most significant transformation in the organization's history, which has generated a wide range of achievements. Dr. Tedros has since become a leader in the global fight against COVID-19, leading the World Health Organization's efforts to tackle the pandemic, especially in the poorest and most vulnerable countries. Previously, Dr. Tedros served as Ethiopia's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2012 to 2016, leading efforts to negotiate the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which provided the framework for financing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. He also served as Ethiopia's Minister of Health from 2005 to 2012, during which time he led a comprehensive reform of the country's health system, improving access to healthcare for millions of people and investing in critical health infrastructure. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Tedros.
Dear colleagues and friends, hello and welcome to the Healing Arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. WHO is pleased to collaborate on the symposium with the Met as well as NYU Johns Hopkins and other partners. We're particularly pleased that museums like the Met are rethinking their missions to see themselves not simply as repositories of valuable objects, but as centers of creative engagement in their communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound effect on artists all over the world, with galleries, museums, and performing venues closed. But we have also seen wonderful examples of artists finding new and creative ways to give voice to the global suffering the pandemic has caused. And in all of the healing arts events in this series, I hope you learn about the growing evidence and opportunities for improving health throughout the arts. But I also hope you're inspired to use your own creativity to bring meaning and joy to your lives and to those in your communities wherever you live. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, my name is Christopher Bailey. I'm the Arts and Health Lead at the World Health Organization, and I'm streaming to you live from a very rainy Geneva. It's my great pleasure to be here at this opening event for the Healing Arts series of events in New York, and it's been quite a journey for us. At the beginning of the year, we had virtual events in London, then later in Venice and Paris, and now we've come to New York. And it's great to be celebrating the healing power of art, and particularly in a time when we need that power more than ever. The Met's always been a special place for me, so I get a personal satisfaction out of the event being hosted here. In fact, in some ways, I probably fell in love in the Impressionist section of the Met. I even had a sense of terror in the Hall of Antiquities when my youngest son escaped from his stroller and started charging towards a 2,500-year-old giant Etruscan urn, thinking it was playground equipment. And then, of course, when my half Belgian sons got a little older, I would take them to the Flemish Masters section to show them a little bit of their heritage. Not so much the landscapes themselves, because the Flemish painters often would superimpose Belgian scenes on top of Italian landscapes, because Belgian countryside was a little bit too boring to practice their three-point perspective on. But those scenes were something special. It showed a particular humanistic vision of the world. Those Flemish paintings were the first in Western art to show snow, to show children playing, to show wedding banquets and people dancing, and the first to show low humor. They found a way of expressing the fantastic in the ordinary and finding the ordinary in the fantastic. And we love those paintings so much that we bought the posters and had them framed. And wherever we go, wherever we've lived in the world, we've brought a little bit of the Met with us, which has always given us pleasure. And in fact, wherever I go in my role at WHO around the world, I always try to find museums as places of refuge, of contemplation, of connection to the community. And if a city doesn't have a museum, then I'll go to the street fairs and see what the local artists are selling and what they're doing and try to buy something, because it's the same thing. You see, for our purposes, art is not something for the few. It's something that all of us practice every day. It's when you go about your house and you arrange a vase of flowers, if you choose what you're going to wear that day, if you are cognizant of the way you move through space, singing a song, you are practicing creativity, whether you realize it or not. We are all artists. When we create, the word itself comes from the Latin. It means something out of nothing. And all of us on this planet, every living thing, has the joy of being able to create biologically. But as far as we know, we humans are the only ones that get the pleasure of creating an idea. And then eventually, through practice, through technique, to bring that idea to life through some form of artistic representation, or in the sciences, through engineering, creating a tool or a building or a set of techniques or ideas. Art comes from the Latin. It just simply means to create with a skill or technique. It's an idea that probably began about 70,000 years ago in something called the cognitive revolution. We're at about the midpoint in the short history of our species. Something happened in the midbrain that created the ability for us to ask the question, what if? That question is the foundation of both the arts, but also of science. The difference being that in science, we've added the extra step of the scientific method to see if that thing holds up in life. But on the artistic side, it doesn't matter. It's about exploring the emotional truth of a situation. So what do we mean by arts can heal? Well, what we don't mean is, I, for instance, am severely visually impaired. I'm basically blind. If I look at a painting, it's not going to cure my blindness. But my engagement with the arts could help me heal. Let's go back to the 1947 WHO Constitution and our definition of health. In that document, we say, health is not merely the absence of disease, but it's the attainment of the highest level of physical, mental, and social well-being. Our definition of mental health goes even further. It says, mental health is not simply the absence of a diagnosable mental health condition, but it's the ability to cope with the everyday stresses of life. It's being able to foster and achieve the highest level of our personal abilities. It's being productive. It's being able to contribute to a community. So as you can see from that definition, the arts have a crucial role to play in that, where it doesn't matter whether I have a diagnosable condition or not. If I can cope with the world, if I can not simply exist, but thrive, if I can find beauty in it, then I found health. And particularly if part of that engagement builds community and solidarity. Because in a sense, in that cognitive revolution 70,000 years ago, it was not just the birth of artistic representation or scientific thought, but another event happened equally important. When Margaret Mead was asked, what is it that makes us human? She said, if you go back to the fossil record and you can find that first instance of a healed femur, that's what makes us human. Because the clan would have had to stop what it's doing and take care of the vulnerable. Before that moment, in nature, if someone was wounded in that way, they would be left behind because they would be a liability to the group. But to make that change, to say, what if we stopped and that life was worth saving? that was the birth of not only medicine, but of hope. Hope as a creative act. Now, today, we're going to be hearing from, as we heard from Dr. Tedros, researchers from Johns Hopkins, from NYU, from the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda, from the University of Florida, University College London. All of these people are representing an emerging group of research institutions that are forming a network of WHO collaborating centers looking at the measurable effects of the arts in improving health. What are demonstrably the best techniques? What are the underlying, what's the underlying science beneath it? But more than just what can be measured, it's also about what can be experienced. Some things you can measure, such as cortisol levels in a hospital ward where you have paintings on the walls, or the recovery time from a physical or psychological trauma through an arts intervention. But other things have to be experienced. Measurement, in some ways, gives you the total landscape of a situation. But I would like to take you downtown. I'm going to tell you a personal story about my voyage into blindness. When I was diagnosed with terminal glaucoma, it felt like a death to me. 80% of the way that we engage with the world is visual, and not only how we function, but our sense of enjoyment and beauty. And when I lost that, I felt this incredible grief for what I had lost. And I felt exiled. I felt that this new world that I was in was dirty, polluted, and corrupt, and I had been outcast from the society of people. More than just the grief of what I had lost, I also felt a tremendous anxiety of what the future might bring. Could I support my family? Could I continue in my job? Dr. Tedros, actually showing compassion, helped me with this and took me aside and tried to reassure me, saying that it is not about what you can't do, it's about what you can do. I eventually swallowed my pride and was able to start using things like these filtered lenses, adaptive technologies, and adaptive techniques. I adopted the white cane. I began to learn echolocation. And slowly, my brain did begin to rewire. Neural pathways were beginning to reroute from my visual cortex to my other senses, giving me a sense of a sound picture of the landscape that was not visual. And yet this world, as interesting as it was, as palpable and more present as it seemed to be, since sound actually runs through objects rather than light reflecting off the surface, it still felt like a poor substitute and something that still felt corrupt and ugly. But I was able to function. I didn't feel that the world was joyful or welcoming to me, but I could begin to function. Until one day I was in London and I was giving a performance at the Wellcome Trust. And what I often do before a presentation or a performance is I'll walk around the town to relax, to get into the rhythm of something. And that particular day, I thought, oh, I'll go to hear a midday concert at St. Martin in the Fields. So I'm walking through Trafalgar Square, and this is a week before lockdown of the beginning of the pandemic. So the square was still filled with people. And as I was trying to make my way to the venue, I started being buffeted about by the crowd, and I suddenly became disoriented. My heart began to pound. I began to sweat, and I realized I was having an anxiety attack. And as I got buffeted by the sea of humanity, I found myself washed ashore on the wrong side of the square at the steps of the National Gallery. I had been dreading going to museums for a long time because they painfully reminded me of this world that I lost and the joy that I used to feel there. And yet to escape the storm of the crowd, I entered it as a refuge. And I found myself in this gallery of huge paintings. And at first I didn't recognize what they were. And I tried to examine them. And I began to realize that these giant paintings were Turner seascapes. These were images of oceans in turmoil, of mists, of storms, of rain. And as I began seeing these in my disrupted vision and allowing my memory to fill in the blanks from what I remembered of those paintings, I began to feel a sense of saltiness, as if I was tasting the ocean spray, but it was actually the tears streaming down my cheek. And I realized for the first time in my journey, through the eyes of Turner, that this was the way I see the world now, and that it could be considered beautiful. That there's something about the alchemy between the artist, the object, and the observer that can serve as a kind of triangulation when we're lost in a storm, to find our way back to a safe emotional harbor. I was no longer afraid of the dark, but saw it as a chance for deep contemplation. And this world of sound actually, rather than exiling me from the world, I felt more connected to it and to the present moment. Just as you willingly close your eyes to better savor a glass of red wine, just as you willingly close your eyes to better embody a beautiful piece of music, just as you willingly close your eyes to better trace the gentle slope of a lover's forearm, so too do I accept the closing of my eyes to better share this moment with you. That to me is the healing time. Our next story goes beyond a person with disability showing what arts can do to heal. It is someone with a mental illness who uses painting to try and heal, not to cure the condition, but to cope and to re-engage with the community. This film comes from our Copenhagen office, and let's let her describe it in her words. Thank you.
Jeg heter Silje Marie Ros, og jeg har PTSD, DID og schizofreni. Og schizofreni er at du føler, ser ting og hører ting som egentlig ikke er der. Det er ikke så enkelt å leve med det, men schizofreni har jeg levd med så lenge jeg kan huske. Jeg hører ting egentlig ganske ofte. Jeg hører jo folk banke på dører og sånn. Og så går jeg til døra, så er det ingen der, så blir jeg så nervøs for om de allerede kommer inn, eller jeg blir så nervøs for. Jeg snakket med en psykolog som sa at kunst kan hjelpe mot all angst og all sånn stemmer og sånn. Det kan få deg til å føle deg bedre. Kunsten min da, det er en ganske stor del av det jeg ser og hører av de stemmene. Det blir på en måte en karakter som jeg maler. Det blir som at jeg har et bilde på de stemmene jeg hører. Jeg ser en liten jente som er rundt 8-9. Hun bestemmer seg ikke hvor gammel hun er, men hun er rundt her. Hun ser egentlig sånn ut. Både med blodårer i ansiktet og svart hår og tomt, eller sint blikk, eller hva jeg skal si. Jeg ville anbefalt for alle å begynne med kunst, fordi kunst er en måte Du kan frigjøre all den angsten man har. Kunst og maling har hjulpet meg til at familie og venner kan bli bedre kjent med meg, at de skjønner litt mer hva jeg går gjennom. For det er egentlig den eneste måten jeg kan uttrykke meg selv, som jeg vet om.
Det er så verdensberømt, det er skrik da.
Jeg tror mest maleriet handler om angst for de to som står bak det.
Ja, det virker ut som det. Du kan løpe fra dem to der som har gjort henne nå kanskje på en eller annen måte. Det det du tenker?
Ja. Det er liksom ingen regler for kunst. Du kan lage hva du vil. Kunst har gitt meg et språk og har gjort meg veldig selvstendig i forhold til det jeg var før. Og kunst har gitt meg veldig mye glede i livet.
Hello, our next speaker is Renee Fleming, the lyric soprano. I had the opportunity to speak with her a few weeks ago, and I asked her what was the most exciting moment of her career. And she told me, well, it would have to be my Met debut. You can only have one of those. And I said, well, actually, I think you can have a second one. And she said, how? And I said, because there's another Met. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you the great lyric soprano Renee Fleming in her second Met debut.
Hi, my name is Renee Fleming, and welcome to all of you tuning in today from around the world. And I wonder if any of you were as surprised as I was by the powerful creative response to the pandemic from balconies, roofs, through windows, and from homes around the world. These videos were shared again and again, going viral, though maybe we should find another word for that. This desire to share something beautiful and expressive by singing, dancing, and playing instruments has been with us for millennia. In fact, Neanderthals had the same vocal apparatus we do, and I often wonder if they invented opera. Years of performing has allowed me to witness a cathartic and emotional response to music on a profound level from audiences around the world. And now, with the emergence of new technologies, researchers are looking into the science underlying this response. My passion for this intersection of arts and health began with a chance meeting with Dr. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health, at a dinner party. I had just been appointed artistic advisor to the Kennedy Center, and I asked if we might collaborate, providing a public platform for science. That science has shown me that the arts can teach us about the brain, can offer low-cost, non-pharmaceutical, non-invasive interventions for disorders such as stroke, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, and aphasia. The arts can also play a crucial role in childhood development and creativity. We launched Sound Health, Music in the Mind, joined by the NEA and 23 different NIH institutes, a truly unprecedented endorsement, providing more than $20 million in funding for music and health research, and this is just the beginning. My own foundation has partnered with the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health to develop a template for standardizing music and health research. The NEA has funded a new Sound Health network at UCSF, an offshoot of this project that provides a virtual resource center for the field. And Susan Mag-Salmon will speak later about the NeuroArts Blueprint, which I'm very proud to be involved in. To spread the word of this exploding sector, I decided to bring Music in Mind with me as I performed, presenting in over 40 cities across North America, Europe, and Asia. In each location, arts organizations identify local researchers or healthcare providers to present with me, planting the seeds of ongoing collaboration between them. In May of 2020, grounded by the pandemic, I went online with the 19-episode series, Music and Mind Live. The show reached close to 700,000 views from 70 different countries, with guest appearances from brilliant scientists and musicians, including Dr. Daniel Levitin, Deepak Chopra, the Grateful Dead's Mickey Hart, and US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. Wanting to contribute more, I noticed that people with long COVID experienced reduced breath capacity. And of course, I realized that singers might be able to help by sharing our breathing secrets. We're like swimmers, having to build ultimate breath capacity and control. Healing Breath was launched in collaboration with Google Arts and Culture and the Kennedy Center. Great vocalists joined me, including Lawrence Brownlee, Christine Baranski, Kristen Chenoweth, Angelique Kidjo, and Vanessa Williams, among others. The project also includes music therapists and the Louis Armstrong Center for Music and Medicine at Mount Sinai. So in the spirit of healing breath, to start out today's session, I'd like for all of us to join in a breathing exercise together. So take a moment to sense where you have tension in your body, shoulders, back of the neck, even hands and feet, and release it. Let it go. Whether sitting or standing, alignment is important. Beginning with how your head balances on your spine, and balance is the key word. Alleviate the effects of text neck, which is really detrimental to the health of your neck, and try to balance your head on your spine. This works even better if you have calming music on. Now, as you inhale, try not to raise your shoulders. Instead, like this, we call that clavicular breathing. Be aware of the release of your abdominal muscles and try to allow them to expand. Pretend to sip. Take in a slow breath to the count of 4. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale on 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, you don't count out loud when you do that. And on your own, increase the number to 6, 8. Keep going as long as you can and try to increase your ability to control the outflow of air. Now, of course, I think that singing makes this a lot more fun. So I encourage you to find Healing Breath on the Kennedy Center and Google Arts and Culture's websites and share it to help long COVID patients around the world or anybody who wants to sing a little better. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Holder, Frederick P. and Sandra P. Rose Chair of Education at the Met. I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I'm privileged to be speaking to you from the museum, which is situated in Lenapehoking, homeland of the Lenape diaspora, and historically a gathering and trading place for many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work on Manhattan Island. Thank you so much to the incredible Renee Fleming and for guiding us through a breath exercise to help us all sing a little better. Thank you also to Max Holein, Dr. Tedros, and Chris Bailey for their remarks, and to everyone here at the Met, NYU, CULTURUNNERS, the World Health Organization, and NeuroArts Blueprint for all the hard work and thought partnership that went into bringing today's event into the world. While 2020 marked the UN's 75th anniversary, it also marked the launch of the United Nations Decade of Action. As 2021 draws to a close, we are 1 year into this new decade that brings great uncertainty in every aspect of life, particularly in health. Yet this uncertainty comes with great opportunity for increased cooperation and collaboration between the arts sector and UN agencies, including the WHO, in order to accelerate change around the UN's global goals, in this case, good health and well-being for all the world's citizens. This event represents a renewed commitment to that action. Now, 2020 also saw international protests to call attention to and demand change on injustice, prompting museums and cultural institutions to reflect on their role in civic society, past, present, and future. Many museums and cultural institutions, including the Met, reset their course of action to become institutions with stronger relationships to local and global communities, relationships that include engagement and actions aimed at the WHO's definition of health, attaining the highest level of physical, mental, and social well-being, both for individuals and communities. Here at the Met, we have long recognized the connection between arts and health through projects that go beyond the walls of the museum, like our Civic Practice Partnership, launched in 2017, which engages artists to cultivate the health of communities. Our access programs in education work with children and adults of all abilities, including those with various dementias and physical and psychological disabilities. Today, I'm here to highlight a pilot program called Your Met Art Box, which is a partnership between the Metropolitan Museum of Art and City Meals, which is one of the largest Meals on Wheels programs in the country, bringing meals to over 2 million meals to about 18,000 elderly New Yorkers every year. Now, older adults in New York City have been and remain isolated and vulnerable, especially during the pandemic. To address this public health issue, the Education Department at the Met has partnered with City Meals to reduce social isolation and foster intergenerational well-being through conversations about art and art making between City Meals food recipients and volunteers during their weekly phone call. Here's how it works. Every month, about 500 City Meals recipients and 500 volunteers receive a box with images of about 4 artworks from the Met's permanent collection, art making materials, free passes to the museum, and other items based on a monthly theme. Volunteers trained by the Met's team use the contents of the art box to facilitate conversation, art making, and other activities that use the 5 senses. This is important, the 5 senses as we engage with art. Responses to the Your Met Art Box has been overwhelmingly positive, both from City Meals volunteers and food recipients. We receive handwritten letters and postcards and emails sharing how the program is really affecting the lives of others. This program literally brings the Met into homes all over New York City. I wanted to share something with you. On the screen, you should be seeing a selection of drawings from Daisy, who was a City Meals meal recipient, using watercolor pencils and inspired by our work in the box from a nature and renewal theme. And you can see more of Daisy's artwork. She sent to us about 16 drawings, all about what was going on with her in that April. And this is just one of many sort of responses from this box. We intend to expand this program beyond the current 1,000 participants in the pilot, and we're exploring ways to measure outcomes of art making and intergenerational well-being on social isolation and well-being. As we consider outcomes, I really want to share with you a powerful outcome from New York Met Art Box. Still seeing there more of Daisy's drawings. And this was an email that was sent to us from a volunteer. Hi, my senior Amanda and I really enjoy the art box. My senior and her sister took art painting classes, and the art box brings back memories. Amanda suffers from depression, and sometimes it's really hard to keep in touch with her. However, as soon as the art box arrived, she was motivated and happy to talk to me and discuss the artwork. Yesterday, I finally had a phone call, and I was so happy to hear that she was going to the museum with a friend from the church. She's grateful for this opportunity, and we are excited to receive our next box. Thank you so much, and that's just one of many. The relationship between art of all disciplines and well-being and its connection to personal and communal health is at the heart of an evolving understanding about the role of art and museums in the civic landscape. Now we'll engage in another conversation that's very much connected about what's possible when researchers, policymakers, and artists collaborate. We could not ask for a more thoughtful and dynamic guide and chair for today's panel, Dr. Nisha Sajnani, co-producer of Healing Arts New York and a driving force between the Arts and Health program at NYU. It is my tremendous pleasure to introduce her. Dr. Nisha Sajnani is the director of the Graduate Program in Drama Therapy, chair of the Creative Arts Therapies Consortium, an international research alliance, and founder of the Arts and Health NYU, a global initiative located within NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. She's also on the faculty of NYU Abu Dhabi, where she developed a transdisciplinary course called Can Art Save Lives?, which unites current evidence for the health benefits of art with practice and policy. Dr. Sajnani and her international team of researchers have been working closely with the WHO Arts and Health Program to map the evidence for the physical, mental, and social health benefits of arts and arts therapies. An award-winning author, educator, and advocate, her body of work explores the unique ways in which aesthetic experiences can inspire care and collective human flourishing across the lifespan. A warm welcome to Dr. Sajnani and our esteemed panelists for today. Thank you.
Warm welcome, Heidi, and I want to thank you for joining us for the opening panel for Healing Arts New York. I'm joined by an unbelievable and extraordinary team of policymakers, artists, and researchers. To my right, we have Jonathan McCrory, who's a Harlem-based artist, the artistic director of the Barbara Ann Tier National Black Theater. Welcome. Jill Sankey, the director of the Center for Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida, who is currently serving as senior advisor to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention COVID-19 Vaccine Confidence Task Force. Yasmin Arboleda, a Colombian-American artist based in New York City. They are the first artist in residence for New York's Civic Engagement Commission. And to my left, Njonge Karangwa, a Rwandan singer, songwriter, and the director of Arts and Culture in Global Health Public Engagement at the University of Global Health Equity. Joining us by live stream, we have Ed Vaizey, former UK Minister of Digital and Culture, who published the first white paper on culture in the UK for 50 years, amongst his other accomplishments, and Christopher Bailey, lead for the Arts and Health for the WHO. So we begin this conversation with an understanding that while we have referenced the arts as a new frontier, that in many ways this is not a new frontier. Rather, it is a call for renewal and investment in the arts and artists as partners in health, care, and well-being, backed by a growing body of evidence that the arts are good for our physical, mental, and social health. So our conversation will center on our foundations and our futures. We welcome your questions throughout this live stream, which you can pose on the Met Facebook or YouTube page where this event is being live streamed. So my first question is for the full panel, to share how you locate yourself in this garden of arts and health. And I use the word garden intentionally because metaphors matter and because we had a wonderful conversation about gardening right before we began. And we're having this conversation at a time when our collective awareness and stewardship of the greater ecology in which we live is critical. And also, like a garden, we have a great diversity of practices that rely on resources and care. So I open that up to you. Where do you locate yourself in this garden of the arts and health, and what motivates you in what you do? And I'm just going to turn to you, Jonathan, to start us off.
I think it's a beautiful question. I think it's a necessary question. When I think about me, I locate myself in, like, I'm wearing a shirt, a slogan by Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, who's the founder of National Black Theater, which says, "The power is in me." How do I locate the power that's within me to make the decisions and really orchestrate and kind of guide which route I want to take? When I think about locating myself, and I think about, and even also the breath exercise that we did a little bit earlier, I think about how does breath allow for me, as one of my pastors said, become my first therapist, to understand how the alchemy in my body wants to move and occupy. And then from there, how do I create decisions that allow for me to then be creatively responsive to my own health and well-being? I think that we start to locate and start to understand the presence and nuance of self. Then we can start to locate and start to understand how we construct new realities that help to build new possibilities for our well-being, our communal well-being, and our singular well-being.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Now, we can continue to go down the line, but if you feel moved, I'll just invite the rest of the panel to jump in, and that'll go for the entire panel. But I'm going to just turn to you, Jill, as I'm looking at you right now. Where do you find yourself in this garden?
Thank you, Nisha. I locate myself at the intersection of the arts and health, first and foremost as a dancer and a musician. And as a human being who turns to the arts every single day, I take time to play my guitar, to sing songs, because it is transcendent and it's essential to my well-being. I am better within every hour that I do that, and I'm better in every day that I do that. I also come to this work as an artist in residence. I started working as an artist in residence in 1994 at UF Health Shands Arts and Medicine, where I had the deep honor of bringing my own relationship to the arts and health to my work with patients who were in really critical moments of their lives and shared those moments and were my teachers. And I applied that teaching then to my curiosity. I was really curious about what is it about the arts and how can we generalize, you know, in a sort of courageous term, how can we generalize this and make sure that everyone has the opportunity to take advantage of the benefits of the arts. And so as a researcher at the University of Florida, I began to seek answers to those questions. So I've directed the Center for Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida since 1996. I run 2 research labs, including the Epi Arts Lab, which is a partnership between the University of Florida and Dr. Daisy Fancourt at University College London. And so in addition to doing clinical studies at UF, we run in the Epi Arts Lab large population-level epidemiological studies to understand the associations between arts participation and creative activities at a population level and their health outcomes. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. There's a lot more to talk about there. And shall we just continue here? Yasmani, where do you locate yourself in this work, and what moves you? What motivates you?
Thank you, Nisha. When I think about the question of location, I begin with my parents. I come from a people who have been moved, or when I think of displaced by brutal violence. My father, Leon Dario Arboleda, was murdered in Colombia in 1992. I come from my mother, Maria Dori Lopez Ospina, who, when she hears cumbia, there is a joy that exists in her body that I come from. I think about coming from a practice of over 2 decades of being invited into community to make space to acknowledge the technologies towards healing and towards freedom that exist in all of our marginalized peoples. When I think about the practice over that time in Afghanistan in 2013, we were able to give away 10,000 pink balloons working with young activists and artists there. I think about the work in Kenya where our communities came together to paint houses of worship yellow in the name of love. Hindus, Christians, Muslims collaborating, building, working with color to transform their experience of those buildings as sculptures in the landscape that speak to our common humanity, but also becoming friends. When I show up in community, I often ask, who are we here and what impossible things can we create that we can only create together? And how does that move us forward? That work has led to my work over the past year and a half here in New York City with the Civic Engagement Commission, where we invited New Yorkers to imagine, gosh, if we had a corrections vehicle, a bus that was used on Rikers Island from 2009 to 2021, how do we transform that vehicle into a vehicle for healing and education that goes to all of the communities that were hardest hit by COVID, right? We now know that those same communities that have the highest number of deaths from COVID have the lowest number of registered voters, have the highest number of people who are going to be evicted when the moratorium ends. So how do we transform this vehicle and invite people to participate in that imagining so that when we collaborate, it makes us aware of the expansiveness of our humanity?
Powerful work. Thank you. Njonge?
So for me, where do so I think I entered into this space out of curiosity, like it was said before, starting to understand and feel what my own art practice was doing for me. I'm trained in global health, so I have this reflex, like, let's start to research what's happening to my body, my mind. And so the wealth of evidence that I found unused in the end. And I was like, why? And then question by question, and I met a lot of people, so a lot of projects that I thought deserved to be known. And that's how I was lucky at the University of Global Health Equity to have people that were receptive to that, and we created Hamwe Festival. And from that platform, so many questions, conversations arised, which generated more research, which generated more projects. And yes, we're still on this road, where now we are engaging still with the festival, still with research, creating content for museum, and pursuing this conversation from that base, yeah.
Thank you. And Ed, I'll turn this over to you. How do you locate yourself in this garden of arts and health? Tell us a bit more.
Thanks very much. So I just had to turn my microphone on. I didn't want any ambient noise to disturb everyone when you were speaking, as I'm speaking remotely from Oxfordshire. So my story is slightly more prosaic than the other panelists. I was the culture minister for 6 years under David Cameron in the UK between 2010 and 2016. And I did a lot of work on arts policy. And one of my strongest feelings about arts policy is that it was too much in a silo. We simply discussed, policies for museums and cultural institutions, and we didn't talk enough about the role of the arts in our communities and how they can help. And I particularly felt that strongly in issues like health and the criminal justice system, which is also an aspect of our health system, and of course education. And in 2015, I published a major government paper on cultural policy, which was the first one that had been published for about 40 or 50 years, setting out our thoughts about how to increase access to the arts in all these areas, or rather how to use the arts in all these areas to make policies more effective. And although I left the government in 2016 when David Cameron resigned as Prime Minister, I carried on my work working with something called the All-Party Group on Arts and Health. And the All-Party Group in the UK is one that combines representatives from all the major political parties in Parliament to campaign on a specific issue. And the All-Party Group on Health, Arts and Health, published a major report on how the arts can be used in the healthcare system, in mental health and indeed in physical health and physical therapy. I think it's a very telling thing that if you go into a hospital or if you go into any kind of clinical setting, very little thought is given, for example, to the environment and design where you may be, and that can have such an important impact on your health. I think it's very telling, for example, if you get on the tube system in the UK, what we call the metro, what you would call the metro, they now play classical music in the stations, which again makes people feel more relaxed as they enter the transport system. So all these things are around us. But what wasn't happening and what hasn't happened so far is any attempt really to collate what is going on, to synthesize what is going on, and to provide the evidence to support more government investment in these initiatives. So I'm very pleased that after the All-Party Group on Arts and Health issued its report, the UK government established something that I think is pretty pioneering. I'm not sure many other governments in the world have it. It's called the National Academy for Social Prescribing, and it's funded by government, and it's there to accelerate initiatives in community health. It's there to gather evidence, and it's there to provide support networks for community groups that are pioneering health initiatives. And I was particularly interested to hear what Renee Fleming had to say, because we have very similar schemes going on in the UK. The English National Opera has pioneered its own breathing scheme for long COVID patients. And indeed, what was said about what the Metropolitan Museum of Art is doing, I think is extremely pioneering, exactly the kind of example or evidence that the National Academy of Social Prescribing should know about and should be communicating to all our national and regional museums. So that's what it's there to do. But I think the most important point about this is that as a minister, I fought very, 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 very hard to get some money out of the Department of Health. The Department of Health in the UK has a budget running to many tens of billions of pounds, and they wouldn't give me a penny. And it was only in the last 3 or 4 years that we managed to get the princely sum of £5 million out of art and health. So to come back to your original question and to reconnect with the garden metaphor, the National Academy of Social Prescribing is a tiny little acorn that has just been planted in the garden of health policy, but hopefully it will grow into a mighty oak, because you can't get a tree out of this unless you plant the seed. And although the seed is a tiny budget, it can grow into something significant, I hope.
Thank you. And Christopher, we've heard about the journey, we've heard a little bit about the journey that brought you here, but could you say more? You didn't start out in the WHO with the arts and health. So tell us what moves you in this conversation.
Well, actually, I think I've talked a lot. I should probably say less. But to be concise, at the moment, when Dr. Tedros first became Director General, he put out a famous call to staff for crazy ideas. And I had for many years in Geneva helped run a local theater company, and in my technical work in the field often used Auguste Boal's forum theater techniques to try and engage communities so that they could feel a sense of ownership into the solutions that we were trying to discover rather than imposing solutions on them. So when he allowed me to come in and gave me my 15 minutes to make my elevator pitch, it was really quite simple. I said, we know that data, evidence, and information are absolutely essential for establishing objective scientific truth, for problem solving, for saving lives. But we also know from the evidence that data, evidence, and information by themselves do very little to change people's behavior or deeply held convictions. For that, we need empathy, often in the form of a narrative. And he agreed. So our program basically falls into three categories. One is the research agenda that this panel represents, where we try and measure and understand what is effective and why, and translate that into effective policy that can then be transformed into investment into the arts sector and the health sector in a kind of virtuous triangle. The second section is working at the community level on arts-based health interventions. And then the third is engaging global partners, particularly the global media. And probably the most gaudy example of that was at the beginning of the pandemic when we collaborated with Lady Gaga and Global Citizen on the Together at Home concert, which I think was crucial at an early stage of the pandemic for not only getting out correct health messaging about hand washing and staying at home and social distancing and supporting the frontline workers, but also creating this sense of solidarity and an understanding that we're all in this together.
Thank you, Chris. So there are a number of threads that we could pull on here. We've heard a number of different practices: artists in community, artists in public health, the creative arts therapies, the role of the arts in knowledge translation. But I'm going to pull on another thread to begin with, and Christopher had referenced the Theater of the Oppressed work from Auguste Boal. Injonge is working at the intersection of the arts and global health equity. You've referred to Yasmani working with marginalized communities in particular. And Jonathan, I've heard you speak about the National Black Theater being deeply invested in Black liberation and the role of the arts in that liberation. So I wonder if we could just settle there for a little bit and think about, how do we think about the arts from the lens of equity? How do we think about health from the lens of equity, especially when we are working with this contradiction, right? When we think about foundations again, we're thinking about a foundation that's also building upon capitalism and colonialism, slavery and control, alongside care, cooperation, collaboration, creativity. I love alliteration. You'll get to know that about me. Can we put that out there? Health from the lens of equity and belonging, and anybody can jump in.
I mean, I think it becomes really important when you think, so National Black Theater is a half-century-old organization founded by a Black woman, still run by a Black woman, with the equation of Black liberation plus equals the space for human transformation. That you have to liberate the psyche of knowing that, and on the soil of America, that the Black body, especially the Black woman's body, is the foundation for capitalism, is the foundation for the civilization that we now all kind of occupy. The Met doesn't, America as we know it, doesn't actually exist without that kind of oppressive system. And so how do you get liberated from it? How do you get healed from it? What blood memories do we all live inside of our bodies that we have to actually reckon with? And you have to create space for that. That space and time is a healing mechanism, is a salve. And so what I spend all my day and time, and actually with the team at National Black Theater, Sade Lithcott, who's the CEO of NBT, is consistently looking at how do I create physical built space for the Black body not to be a voyeur, not to recenter Western ideas, but to really center their own cultural indigenous practice. How do you actually divorce yourself from a racial construct and start to love yourself from your cultural happenings, your cultural space of being? And I think that is a psychological quest that someone has to actually release themselves into. It's a quest that is triggering, that is marred, that is actually deals with a physical algorithm inside yourself, but also a mental, spiritual, heart chakra space. And art has the really beautiful way of creating a container for us to do a quantum leap investigation of that. Art allows for us to center ourselves in a space. In the space right now, we are in a built space. That built space has air that is shifting because we are present. It's only happening because we are present with each other. And that happening is a unique occurrence that can never be repeated again. And inside of that happening, inside that reckoning of understanding and appreciating each other, we are becoming changed. And can we reckon with that change? Can we actually acknowledge the change that is being made by you standing here asking me a question? And also, I know I'm going in on it, but it's also this thing that the atoms in this space hold history and legacy. We walked into it. Can we acknowledge that to start off? Mm-hmm. Then how are we contributing to that legacy? When we leave, these atoms will hold our DNA inside of it. Anna Devere Smith says some of the most beautiful things about why she does what she does as documentary theater. She says that when she records you on her tape recorder, that she is capturing your soul in that moment in time. And that is her opportunity and quest, that's why she doesn't wear shoes when she performs, to walk into your space of where your soul was when she replays that tape. When we walk into any built space, we are walking into that recorded history and time. How and which ways are we honoring that legacy? And how much ways are we building on that? And how much ways are we understanding and we're divorcing ourselves of our ego when we talk about the health, divorcing ourselves of the ego and talking about our contribution to the global history and the local histories that we must be able to be a part of.
Those words make me think about Adrienne Maree Brown and emergent strategy. When I think about my work within the Civic Engagement Commission over the past year and a half, I think, my goodness, this government and government system within the city of New York, it's a system, and therefore it is, there's a slowness, it's not responsive. How can we be responsive in this moment to the challenges that we're facing? And how can we invite institutions and organizations to practice change? How do we invite people to practice transformation all of the time, right? I am often thinking, gosh, we built gymnasiums for the body everywhere. Where are gymnasiums for the human imagination? How are we inviting folks to participate and to prioritize beauty and joy in the work so that it can be sustainable?
Can you tell us about the People's Bus and how that plays into the Gymnasium for the Imagination?
Yeah, well, very early on, I recognized that most people have no idea that the Civic Engagement Commission exists in the city of New York. It is the only agency in the city that has a direct mandate to build trust in our democracy. When I heard that, I was like, build trust in our democracy? The word trust. That's all about relationship building. How do we show up in community and ask people, gosh, if you had a corrections vehicle and you were going to transform it, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it do? How would it do that? And to actually trust people to show you in visuals, right? Like literally we brought postcards all over the 5 boroughs and people responded. We had a ranked choice voting mechanism, a ballot that people could tell us, is it a bodega? Is it going to become a theater? Is it going to become a place for conversation, a church, a mosque? What could this bus be if it was transformed towards healing and education? And then taking all that feedback, we imagine, I always think about my drawings not as a pencil meeting a piece of paper, but as a drawing in to an invitation, to a way of thinking, to a way of participating. I love this metaphor of the garden, and my friends and I always talk about, we always joke with each other, who's the most beautiful flower in the garden? We all are. We all need each other. I have a friend, Jenny Douglas, who speaks about this idea that we are each other's medicine. How do we show up to partake and to make space for all of the histories that we come from? And how do we acknowledge a history of violence based on racism and otherwise, a history of erasure that we know exists? To be able to build a future that is healthy, we must acknowledge all of the challenges and the patriarchy and the white supremacist systems that continue to infect, and that is a virus that influences all parts of industry and our society. It's so much of this work, it has to do with presencing and showing up for each other honestly, right? With all of the ways that we speak, with all of our words, how do we I always ask, what is the flavor of democracy? Is it honey? so that it's sticky and sweet, right? How is it that we're inviting folks into a celebration? From the very beginning of this work, I thought to myself, if we were throwing a party for the whole city of New York and everyone's invited, how do we make that guest list? How do we make sure folks know that they are invited because we need them, because we have one Earth, and to shift it, it's gonna take all of us. How do we make sure we do that with a smile, with kindness, practicing humility? These are things that we have to, again, when I think about our educational systems, how do we invite our educational systems to transform as the Earth is transforming, right? We must catch up to all of the animals and the rivers and the clouds that are moving about, shifting. And I think we have to do that quickly to be able to save our species. So.
Thank you for bringing it back to our role within that greater ecology. I'm thinking about the Hamwe Festival in particular, and specifically the mandate that you have to link creative communities to global health equity. What is that relationship for you?
So it comes down to a lot of things that have been said. I think what is equity in the end, it's an idea. It's an idea that must have occurred to someone that have looked at all the injustice, inequality of chances, the social determinant of health, the fact that we are all born in places with not the same chances to be, in the end, alive in the next minutes. So ideas to generate change, they have to be communicated. They have to be understood. And arts, and through all the experiences and conversation that we had in a Hamwe Festival, there's a chance to, for people to share their experiences and for them to be understood. By generating, by concentrating on what we have in common. And I do believe that's really one of the power of the arts. We were discussing before about what is the role of the artist in the end, what can, as artists, what can we bring into this society? And there's definitely this sense of community, common understanding. When we talk about equity, there is definitely inclusion, all of those concepts. I think using creativity and art as medium would definitely facilitate common understanding, generating empathy, and then maybe allow change. Yeah.
That is a really age-old question, isn't it? The role of the artist in society, and what is that role now, in this moment? Yeah. And that's a question that we've received from our audience, in fact. How can we be responsive in this moment? How can we invite institutions to be a part of this change, this momentum, this work, this effort at belonging in a greater ecology? And I wonder, Jill, if you'd like to respond to any of that.
Yeah, I think, part of the answer to that question is understanding the problems better. And we've long known there's a big social gradient in arts participation when we're thinking about more formal forms of participation, like coming to this space at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to museums, to galleries, to performances, to those things. And those social gradients center around things like education and gender, parents, education, income, those sorts of things. They don't apply to engagement and creativity. Art belongs to all of us. We all create, we know this. But when we think about formal participation in the arts, where a lot of research is centered right now, there is a huge social gradient, and that's really problematic. So we know about that problem. So we must address the systemic barriers and the practical barriers and all of the barriers that are limiting participation in all types of art activity. Human art behavior belongs to all of us, but the ways in which we participate do not belong to all of us. So those disparities are really enormous. So the systemic changes are really critical right now.
I think about the question, what is the role of the artist in our society? And I immediately think about the question, what is the role of the artist in each of us? How are we all practicing creativity and imagination, moving us towards health and well-being?
Well, and I also just want to uplift that I think in this age, in this social media age, there's a lot of call-out culture. And what does it mean to call in? What does it mean to bring someone into intimacy and conversation? What does it allow for you to understand your contribution inside of the trauma? There is actually a lot of learning and love found when we actually start to understand that we contribute It's a partnership. Relationships, anything that comes to you is in relationship to you. So then it's actually having a conversation of saying, how do I reckon with my participation inside of this moment? And actually, how do I call people in to understand their humanity, not their psychological or their trained positionality of their condition? We are conditioned to have superiority. We are conditioned to have isms. And that conditioning can be challenged. But it can only be changed if, I think personally, if we call people into relationship with their humanity of self, not just their isolation of their condition.
Thank you. And Chris, I wonder, I mean, I think part of the path that we've been walking, even to get to this moment, has been about calling in people into relationship. Institutions that have not necessarily been the default collaborating partner for WHO. I'm thinking about the ways in which you have called in cultural institutions to be a part of this conversation. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
It's no accident that during the pandemic, you had this resurgence around the world of the Black Lives Matter movement, les Vies Noires comptent over here in Switzerland, and the Me Too movement. That what we're talking about here are the social determinants of health. Chain of human health is only as strong as its weakest link. And if we act under the illusion that somehow the status quo and retaining all of the power and resources within an elite is somehow not going to have an effect on the whole is ridiculous. And the virus ripped away the facade of that when you have people that don't have access to healthcare, and you have people who, even within a wealthy community, have their rights impinged upon, it actually affects the health of everyone. And so this notion of solidarity is critically important. But at the same time, as you say, it's about inclusion, not exclusion. And that means we have to reach out to partners. In this case, bringing together the odd couple of arts institutions and hospitals who may not have necessarily seen themselves as integrated or aligned. And I think part of our role at WHO is to help not only provide the evidence to reassure the science-based people that there's there, but also to translate that to the artistic community and show why it's important and why we have to work together. And I think we're experiencing a moment right now where it's actually coming together, it's converging.
So speaking about the evidence, I'd like to stick with the research side of this for just a moment and think about where do we need to go? Where do we need to go in the next 5 years when it comes to arts and health research? We have evidence, we need more. We need to get specific around how the arts promote health and well-being in all the ways that we've spoken about. And we also need to know more about how it addresses specific conditions, right? Specific concerns, depression, anxiety, what have you. So where do we need to go with regards to research? And anybody can jump in on that question. Once again, the floor is yours.
I would take from from the part of the world that I know. I'm from Rwanda, so working at the level that looks at the African continent. For us, I think that there's a big gap of evidence of practice evaluation. Where do we need to go? I would dream of, there was this 2019 report that was published by WHO that looked at a scoping review of all those interventions and what they can do, the benefits they can have on communities, individual, physical health, mental health, all of that. I do believe we need that. I think that's how policies can change if we don't have something, how funders can invest if we don't have something as such. So maybe in other part of the world it's different, but definitely on our side, that's something that we need. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you in just a minute, Njonge, because we've had conversations before about how we pursue this research. And it actually connects back to something that Jill mentioned around the formalization of the research process and whether research is done, with folks who've been doing it for some time, versus looking at what's happening on the ground. And maybe it's not a versus, it's of course a both and, but that the methodologies may differ and our strategies may need to differ. Can you speak to this question of where the research needs to go?
It's a huge question. It's not for an hour. But yes, there's lots of places it needs to go. But I think there are a few things that are really critical. And one of those is valuing a range of ways of knowing. Chris mentioned earlier, evidence doesn't drive behavior change. Narratives are critical in that space. So I think really acknowledging various ways of knowing is very important. The histories and traditions that have known since humans have been on this earth, why and how the arts heal. But we also have to recognize that there is a primary currency in healthcare and public health of evidence, right? Of randomized clinical control trials, of meta-analyses. And so we also need to engage that language and that ability to communicate in that sphere. And I just want to tag on there that research also needs to be linked to policy. Yeah. So I think in this space, as we invest research dollars in the incredible investments that Renee Fleming mentioned earlier, we need to be thinking about the policy possibilities and implications of those investments in research. And we need to be thinking about how we translate that research, and we also need to think about how we build collective statistical power, so things like core outcome sets. There's so much research happening, and it's so exciting. Could we offer, here's, in this sphere of public health, here's 5 key outcomes. If you're gonna study stuff, consider studying these things so that we can collectively make stronger cases, and also making sure that in translation of these findings that we're using the arts, that we're speaking to broad audiences, and that we're bringing through the human experiences that we all relate to, as well as the important statistics, right, that we're trying to derive in the Epi Arts Lab right now.
Thank you.
I thought I would come in here briefly and say that I agree with Jill. I think it's very important. I mean, the National Academy that we set up in the UK is there to collect research and make sure that people learn from each other and don't reinvent the wheel. But it's important, I think, one of the things I found frustrating in government is that you can have too much research. You can have 5-year research projects when you just want to get on with it. If you want to have an opera singer do breathing exercises with long COVID patients, you don't want a 5-year research project before you get the funding to make sure that people can actually get the benefits of that exercise. And for me, a lot of arts and health is obvious common sense. I mean, in terms of what the Met is doing with its boxes, for example, in terms of ending social isolation, that is common sense. I don't think you need extensive research. So sometimes research can actually delay the benefits. But I also want to echo what Jill said in the earlier part of the discussion, because I think that what this whole discussion about the role that the arts can play in health is really about what the arts can play in our community. And I think for far too long, we've been stuck with a 19th century model of the arts experience, which is a big brick box full of very expensive art. And we really need to completely rethink that model. Elite art, wonderful art is a very important thing, but it needs to get out to the people rather than the people having to learn to somehow get past these enormous pillars, formidable pillars and doors that are preventing them really from getting entry. And so when we talk about how the arts can aid our communities, we're really talking also about how the arts or arts institutions in the art world, the elite art world, has to reinvent itself.
And I also just want to say we also have to have a conversation around the value of when we talk about going into community, how there is this kind of begging society that is actually created where artists and art makers have to kind of plead for money, plead for the capital to be able to make the idea happen. And when they want to go into community, they are taught that that is low art. That low art is not valued. That low art is not a high C, it's a low C. And we create capitalistic systems that actually demonize the notion of healing, right? It turns healing as only a philanthropic high value that only the elite get to taste, get to be a part of. And that if we're actually going to get to that space, that space where we get to imagine a future, dream into a possibility. I loved when you said, I want to dream into a possibility. Dream into a possibility where my wholeness is not commodified, my wholeness is loved and accepted, we also have to start to understand that the vibration of art needs to be funded at a high level no matter where it is, no matter how it is being done. Absolutely. That the imagination needs to be given fruitful resources to begin to understand how to quantify what love looks like, right? This vibration that I think we all search for. This vibration that we love, that we seek for, right? But it's a vibration that is so ephemeral that we sometimes don't give it value. The exact same way we do with art. We don't give art the value because of the ephemeralness of it. And the research can sometimes demonize that ephemeral notion as being unsuitable for actual investment. And I mean long-term investment.
So we need to talk about funding, and we need to talk about policy in the time that remains. And I'm just going to go to policy for a moment, because I'm thinking about some of the challenges that occur when you have a visionary plan. Like I'm thinking, Ed, of the all-parliamentary group that is focusing on social prescribing. Now, that was one of the outcomes of the policy paper that you published, but what have the challenges been? Where has it traveled, and what have the bumps in the road been to actually realizing another way of valuing the arts, of moving it out of art institutions and into healthcare spheres?
Well, the challenge has been exactly what your last speaker encapsulated so brilliantly, which is, first of all, that artists have to beg and plead, and they're regarded as somehow, I don't want to disparage the healthcare community. I think it's the fault of policymakers. In fact, I think there are many more healthcare professionals who now get this and understand that working with artists and community arts groups can have a real impact for their patients. But policymakers see this as ridiculous. They want to spend money on, understandably, on machines and drugs and so on and so forth, and huge new buildings and hospitals, very much stuck in the past, and they regard it as completely ridiculous to spend money on the arts, which is really insane in my view. So that's obstacle number one, the policymakers who don't get it. And, I think if you walk into a school, the most important person these days is probably the person who's making the school meals, because that's going to actually have almost as much impact on kids' futures and health as their teachers, but they're still very low in the hierarchy. So all of that has to change. But similarly, I do think, again, as our last speaker said, the artistic community, or the elite artistic community, has to understand that working with communities is just as valuable and important as having a show at a museum. So we ourselves, those of us who are passionate and work in the arts, have to change our mindset as well. The policy problem is that politicians don't care about the arts or understand its impact, to sum it up.
I just think it's really important that at this juncture we name the fact that there are communities that practice self-determination and are finding ways to make these things happen instead of waiting around for the money to show up. I think about Mujeres en Movimiento in Queens, women who show up to collaborate, dance, bailoterapia, to empower each other and give each other a sense of belonging. I think about Saris Pineda working at Territorial Empathy, who, looking at data and applying that data, sharing it with marginalized communities to empower the sustainability of those communities moving forward. I think about Carolina Rubio Mcbride, the lawyer, immigration lawyer and activist and artist who uses somatic practices to have undocumented women create beautiful clay sculptures while she's teaching them about their inalienable rights. There's so many people out there. I think about Materials for the Arts in Queens, who takes 1.1 tons of materials that are left behind by people and then recycles them towards art classrooms across all 5 boroughs. All these beads, there's 8.8 million beads in the People's Buzz. That is an art piece that was created by the Mujeres en Movimiento, representing all 8.8 million residents of New York City. And to me, the astonishing work of these women, the legacy of the generations that gave them the power to create this work, speaks to their beauty and their capacity to move us forward.
So the skill of the artist and the skill of communities in making it work, however, by hook or by crook, to take some of the skills that one has as an artist and to bring them into the vision that we are trying to co-create together involves leaning into what we have, noticing what we don't have and doing it anyway, is what I'm hearing in that story. If you want to say more, I see it.
Well, I just think what's so beautiful about the People's Buzz is that we took a buzz that used to be a vehicle for punitive justice, and we transformed it into a place of joy, of warmth, we created a stage where anyone could show up and be themselves, their full selves. And I think when we think about belonging and creating space, when I think about collective well-being and individual well-being, those things are inseparable. We must think about our Earth and its transformation and its invitation to have all humans transform.
And I think I just want to lean in just really quickly. I think that it is beautiful to talk about the imaginative ingenuity of humans and of people of color in particular who have done with less and made something quantify, like something possible happen. I think about soul food. I think about like peanut butter. All these things that have been created by Black brilliance of just like saying, I have little, but I'm gonna make something out of it, right? I think that I now wonder, because there's been almost 400 years of that technology being practiced, what does it look like if I have all the resources? Give me that opportunity, right? I think that is a part of that is a psychological labor that you're asking for my body to know. And then I don't get to know what rest looks like, because I'm always having to figure out how to make scraps turn into an actual meal that is for my health. I'm not actually able to say, oh, this garden that I have, I'm actually able to take something organic and put it in my body. What does that feel like? I learn a different kind of technology. So I wonder, when we talk about, like, I think it was brought up about prescriptions and talking about like policies, I wonder, and I asked the larger question of, do we actually want healing to happen? Because healing allows for liberation. Liberation means I'm not on your system. Do we actually want people to be free from a system? A system where they can have ownership of their body, their legacy, and their destiny, which is not attached to a mechanism that says that I have to be attached to your policy, I have to be ruled by your governance, I have to go into your prescriptions, right, in order to be able to know that my body is whole, to actually have ownership of my own self. And I think that is another question around health that we have to ask ourselves. Yeah. Now that we venture into this new era where our breath is attacked, and we're having a conversation about how do I know what actually is going inside my body? Do I actually know what's happening inside my body? The next question is, well then, what does it look like if I find myself liberated from that psychosis? Liberated from the psychosis of always having to be self-medicated, always having to medicate myself. And I figure out what liberation feels like. It's a totally different mechanism, totally different sense of being.
Do we know what that looks like?
And
I
think that's the largest. I think that's the largest existential question that we will be asking ourselves.
So I want to turn to this question, and it might be our last question for this panel conversation, and it's a question from our audience. And the question is, it is great to see the global momentum behind the healing in the arts, but this isn't new, as I mentioned right at the top of this panel. This isn't a new frontier, but it's a moment to come together again and seek renewal and reinvest in what is different this time. What is different this time?
I would offer one thing in response and follow to that, and in response to the notion of social prescribing. This is an idea that's really bubbling up in the United States. There's a lot of talk about social prescribing. There's 2 pilots happening right now, one in Massachusetts, one in Florida. I'm hearing everybody talking about it right now. And we have an opportunity to envision it. It will be different because we don't have a socialized medical system like many of the nations that are investing in social prescribing. So my question in response to this question is, can we envision something around social prescribing that flips those equations, right? That gives the power to the artists in communities who facilitate healing broadly all the time to be a part of those systems. Can those resources be distributed differently? Can we envision and create a scenario in which, when medical systems recognize that they can link people into cultural and artistic systems to avoid going down medical roads that may not always be necessary, can those resources go to the community so every community can define, right? Every community can define and create those opportunities
so that every
for
corner
engagement.
of this garden is watered. What is different this time for you, Njunge?
I would say that it's happening at a time where a lot of paradigms around knowledge are being challenged. Paradigms around race. We talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about there are many conversations also in the academic world about what is really research. Is it really something that you have to do after the IRB and after this and after that? That's really the only way to create knowledge. So it's coming at a time where, from many directions, the way we do health, and probably it's happening in other disciplines, is challenged. And we need that challenge. I would give an example. For example, in my region of the world, there's what we call traditional medicine, right? And then it is like opposite to modern. So that's what does it mean exactly? And when you come with the idea of art and health, people are like, we've been doing that from quite a while. And what is your innovation? But I don't think there's innovation at all. I think that there's maybe another way to approach the conversation, to include, to take that actually not as traditional medicine, but as medicine that shows results. Otherwise, people, why would they go? And to build different type of partnerships that would not, that would be a bit more equal. And yeah, that's what I think is different. I think it's the general climate of our approach to knowledge that changed it. Yeah.
So it's the climate in which we are having this conversation.
Well, it also makes me think about the climate in general, right? What happens in the Gulf of Mexico affects what's happening in my apartment in the Lower East Side here in New York City, right? It is whole. We're one earth, and we're being invited to really understand that all of our communities are interdependent. How do we practice that interdependence? Consciously, intentionally.
We are
with
in
care.
a time when we are much more collectively aware of that interdependence because of the pandemic, because of the climate crises that we are in, and we are in a time where we are questioning our foundations, questioning the foundations of knowledge, questioning the foundations of artistic practice in order to imagine a more hopeful, vibrant, and liberated future. So I want to thank each one of you. Thank you for being part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you at home, and we'll end it here. The CEO of the International Lab for Arts, the Arts and Mind Lab.
Thank you to our remarkable panelists. What a great preview of the field and what can be accomplished together by using the arts for health and well-being. I'm Susan Magsamen, Executive Director of the International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and co-director of the NeuroArts Blueprint, along with my wonderful colleague, Ruth Katz at the Aspen Institute. Today's event and this moment in history underscores the unique opportunity we have to reconnect the arts with health. The arts have always been used as a tool for healing, but society often overlooks their essential contributions to our humanity. The modern world can be frenetic, isolating, and transactional, but global health challenges such as the COVID pandemic are forcing us to reevaluate everything, and in turn are pushing us to deliver on the UN's decade of action and sustainable goals as never before. So how can we move from this vision of transformation to action? This is the question we address in our work on the NeuroArts Blueprint. The Blueprint is a strategic action plan, a roadmap, constructed to strengthen the scientific research on the impact of the arts on the brain and body and human behavior, and to use this knowledge to improve health and well-being. It provides a path forward to coalesce, coordinate, and scale our vibrant and diverse field that brings together science, the arts, and technology to advance the health and well-being of individuals and communities around the globe. We are releasing the NeuroArts Blueprint on December 1st, 2021, and invite you to join our virtual unveiling. Please go to the website neuroartsblueprint.org to sign up for event updates. We look forward to seeing you then. And now I have the honor of introducing today's final group, the Pandemic as Portal Collective. Artist-physician Chip Thomas has brought together a group of artists to engage in the complex relationship between art and healing among the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States. The Navajo Nation, which occupies over 27,000 square miles in northeastern Arizona, southeastern Utah, and northwestern New Mexico. Modern day arts, and health practices among the Navajo people have a lineage to the notion of ki, which means kinship, translated as an effective action and solidarity, including such concepts as love, compassion, kindness, friendliness, generosity, and peacefulness. We have much to learn from this foundational concept, one being able to function as a bridge or a portal, and most importantly, to make visible the power of the Navajo practices to heal and thrive for all of us. The ravaging devastation from the COVID-related deaths, especially among Navajo elders, served as the intergenerational trigger to revitalize and protect cultural practices and other foundational knowledge. The Pandemic as Portal project has developed as an artist-led collaborative committed to bolstering ongoing community efforts and reach the Navajo people directly in order to reaffirm the enormous cultural and ancestral knowledge and concepts of health that are intricately linked to art, but also in connection with our natural world. Please join me in welcoming the Pandemic as Portal Collective.
This culture has been here for thousands of years, and they know resiliency and they know adapting to hardship. So it's really not so much what I hope to bring to them, more so what I can learn from them. My name is Chip Thomas. My street art name is Jet Sonorama. I started the Painted Desert Project in 2012. Initially, it was an opportunity to bring artists to the reservation and or work with artists from the reservation, painting murals, mainly on roadside stands. But it's evolved over time into a community service project. We're at the incredibly beautiful Sagi Canyon located in the Western Agency of the Navajo Nation. Sage Bond is a singer, musician from Cow Springs. I reached out to her and asked her to share with me lyrics to one of her songs. She chose the song Truth.
Yate Shike Do Shudunee. My name is Sage Bond. I'm a musician working with Chip Thomas on a project that brings awareness of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Diné and Hopi Res. Through art, we tell stories reflecting society and personal experiences. In this way, we present a form of healing. I wrote Truth while in quarantine, working around the Navajo Nation lockdown hours. It is a message to others and for myself to do better for the next generation.
Take from me the colors from the truth. People dying to be heard. Awaken now, creation of a day. Can you live for me?
The World Health Organization reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in working with them. They feel that the objective of the work I'm doing is consistent with the goals of the UN in terms of community-based wellness. March 2020, the country went into lockdown as the coronavirus pandemic began ravaging the East Coast. By April of that year, New York City and New Jersey were the epicenters of the pandemic, with the most infections reported per 100,000 people. And by late May 2020, this dubious distinction shifted to the Navajo Nation, home to only 170,000 people. Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez implored residents on the Navajo Nation to practice pandemic mitigation measures, stating, "The virus is exploiting our greatest strength, care, kinship, or love of family." Indeed, many homes on the Navajo Nation are multi-generational, and reservation clinics and hospitals began filling with multiple people from one household who were positive for the virus and too often dying from it. Though the land is rich with natural resources, including coal, oil, natural gas, uranium, and water and aquifers, neo-colonial exploitation of those resources has left a quarter of the population of the nation without running water or electricity. The virus exploited this vulnerability also. President Nez summoned memories of the time Dene people were forced marched by Kit Carson and the U.S. Cavalry from their homeland in New Mexico and Arizona to an internment camp in southern New Mexico in 1864 as part of the Indian Removal Act. The first example of a scorched earth policy was practiced during this brutal campaign. President Nez asked citizens to help one another, saying, "That's when the best came out of many of our ancestors, helping each other out, carrying the load for the elders, caring children for our mothers. Now it's our turn to think of our future, our children, our grandchildren." This pandemic offers aid organizations and others willing to engage the moment an opportunity to learn lessons of survival, land stewardship, commerce based on mutual aid with an emphasis on interpersonal relationships and respect if we choose to be humble enough to learn from Native communities. Pandemic as Portal represents a cross-cultural, intersectional team approach to exploring how this unique moment in history can be used to redirect resources to advance the communal good with art as an integral part of community building and group expression. And now I have the honor and pleasure of introducing to you my dynamic team.
Yad shudna edo shik Esther Belen Yanishya Kloge Dene Nishla Tura Chitni Bashis Chin Kitla Chitni Dashache Ta Chitni Dashanella. It's an honor to be here. Navigating our role as artists within existing frameworks is a continual process. Our presentation will address the varied portals of engagement, intersecting the traditional narrative of aid giving and the mean-making process was our approach. We chose to practice ke, to engage relationally with people and with the land. This focus edifies a land and community perspective, customary of Dene practices, imagines models and methods to honor communities, also representational for those working within their communities, such as us. In early spring, we began reactivating an abandoned space, the Anasazi Aniyazi Inn in Seigi Canyon, as base for our project. In the course of 3 attempts, we gained momentum. Locals and visitors pulled over to the abandoned motel, inquiring about our artifacting. Too often, the non-Indian relationship centers on extraction, depleting the resources, both in the land and the people. An oppressive lens of ecology that has been modeled for centuries. One of our goals is to refocus that lens. This collective's approach refuses to add to the archival subjugation, but instead proffers the subjugators to reform their own legacy of policies.
Yate Rylan Pacenti Dashajana Tachitni and Shlan, Tobahan Bashashi, Tudlini Dasha Chase, and Jikini Dashinele. Pandemic as Portal is partially a storytelling mural project. It not only asks the role of the artists, but the response to an exterior monopolized world. In our approach, we question practices as a tool for communal accessibility on and off the reservation. We come here today in the occupants of a contemporary art space, hopes that moving forward, our context will uphold the values and epistemology of what it means to be and support Dene, the people, protective, harmonic, and accountable. In our Dene philosophy, we acknowledge the sun rotation, from east around to the north, sunrise to sacred darkness and the light, life's evolving contrasts. This eco-knowledge is applied to our thought process where we think, plan, live, and reflect. COVID-19's impact on Navajo Nation put a screeching halt to health and mindfulness, then amplified our lack of existing resources prior to the pandemic. Our traditional values were challenged while highlighting settler colonialism's historical infiltration. From deaths due to the lack of access to water, to our exposure of systemic oppression enforced by border towns, our ways counteract the exterior world's apocalyptic agenda. What might it mean to be an artist on the front line, coming from ancestral warrior legacies? Visualizing a future means to not overlook the pre-existence of gate-kept generational and domestic violence projected from policy. When the system could not show up for the people, we were left with mutual aids and efforts that had already been rooted in radical organizing. We were humbled by the teachings of our non-human relatives. We relied on our traditional medicine, if access, and reclaimed a sense of autonomy. We were left with the complexity of kinship, which in Navajo we refer to as Ke.
Creative collaboration on behalf of healing demands that we stand in honest accountability for the legacy from which we are attempting to heal. Several months back, Carlos Baca of Fourth World Farm shared with us about honoring the aspirations of plants by defending their right to grow among the biodiversity where they exist in the natural world. He said, "They aren't the same being when you remove them from their family." This concept maps healing and also so much about the ethos of the violations perpetrated against land and people within colonization and capitalism, past and present. Repairing our harm is integral to healing. This project demands inquiry into the wellness of the oppressor, into the compartmentalized and intellectual numbness from which we carelessly enact violence. The legacy of people who descend from colonizers, people like me, people like many of you, remain cogs in the system that have and continue to cause harm in Indigenous communities. Positioned with righteous confidence within institutions and private entities, we work normalizing values that reduce land to capital, people to labor, and art to commodity, engineering the drought condition of both our gaze and creative spirit. The emptiness of our cultural bankruptcy drives an insatiable hunger that we attempt to soothe with consumption and altruistic fables that we tell about ourselves. Amidst the abundance of consequences resulting from colonial sickness, it's time to walk toward the wounds of estrangement from our humanity and how they're woven into our institutions. The possibility of this portal expands when we commit to the transformation required to re-anchor the value of art in community belonging, identity, and the interdependence of healing.
Dosha Maragua. Dishkag Nahudosha, Nitawe Hudosha. I'm Chinupahanska Luger. I'm Awachet, Dripping Earth Clan, Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara. I come to you with a few questions, and I think that's the closest thing that we can get as answers. We are considering how we can affect change in communities, and I ask people to question, what is your definition of community? We were asked to work with Navajo Nation. This is an entire sovereign nation of people with diverse cultural practices that are so complicated and so complex. To help one is to not help hundreds, thousands. And so, the definition of community we must engage with is one that is beyond the human scope, one that is beyond ourselves as some sort of hierarchical lens to experience what mental health means, what crisis means, and what community means. We are tied to our landscape. We have a relationship with it that's one of a sense of belonging and has not yet been perverted by the Western colonial aspects of an innate desire to consume and transform this sense of belonging into the acquisition of belongings. We stand in the wake of that, a culture that sustained its own practices of mental health and care, and looks out not just for us as people, but our relationships to the land. You wonder about research, how you can apply these sorts of things. We exist in a world that has been informing us for generations. And if you acknowledge the intelligence of creatures beyond the human experience, then you can begin to understand that there is billions of years of study and research that encouraged us to understand how life exists here and what it means to be in relationship. And to the Navajo people, the Dene, what it means to be in Ke. I'm Mandan Hidatsa Rikara. I'm from another nation. And I wonder about how this is going to influence the way that we engage with communities across the globe. And what is the hierarchy that the space that we are invited into changes the way that we relate to the people who we want to help. And I encourage you, as we work forward, to pay attention to what has worked for those communities long before they needed to ask for help, because most of that pain is created by that extraction. So consider yourself and these larger power dynamics unhealthy, and the cure exists within the communities that you want to reach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to Pandemic as Portal for showing what's possible when we seek to learn from communities. I'm here to give closing remarks today, which a lot of it would be shout outs, and mostly it's a call to action and thank yous. Thank you to our panel chair and our panelists, who are people who find power in themselves, dancers, musicians, intercultural creativity, curious global health practitioners, policymakers who want to use the arts to make policy more effective. I call you to action, call to action if you're listening, inviting people to practice change, invite art and artists to facilitate common understanding. I exhort you to examine systemic disparity in access to art engagement, solidarity in access to health, recognize the value of research to guide policy, value different ways of knowing. I call for common sense on the ways that research guides policy to get to practice sooner. I recognize self-determination in communities and artists. I recognize the practice of care and engagement with people and land. I ask you to bring art into your own healing practice. Bring art to community healing. What can you dream into possibility? What can you dream into possibility for yourself, for your community, the community next door, for non-human creatures in the earth where we all live? Now, there's also some other housekeeping things I must do. So call to action and thank you, because this event will not be possible without the help of many, many people who are in the background. This event will be archived on the Met's YouTube channel, so please share it. I invite you, our virtual audience, to follow up on public events organized through Arts and Health at NYU on Monday, the 20th of September, which is tomorrow, and Tuesday. Throughout the fall, Healing Arts New York will continue its program with film premieres, artist commissions, research programs, special conversations with thought leaders across the arts, healthcare, and policy sectors. For the full program and the latest updates, visit CULTURUNNERS.com to find out what's happening. I'd also like to thank key partners in this and the co-organizers of today's event, the Arts and Health New York, WHO Arts and Health Program led by Christopher Bailey, CULTURUNNERS led by Stephen Stapleton, Creative Arts Therapies Consortium at NYU Steinhardt led by Nisha Sajnani, International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University led by Susan Magsamen. And also like to thank the Met production team, who you don't see, but they are working very steadily to make this a great event. Our ASL interpreters, Stephanie and Cheryl, and our artist assistants, Anne, Nancy, and Cecilia. And lastly, I invite you to join us again here at the Grace Rainey Rogers Auditorium at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the closing Healing Arts Symposium at the Met on November the 14th. Thank you so much.